pick me, pick me. So I'm seeing a lot of talk about cruise ships. People are talking about pros and cons of working on cruise ships, their experiences. There's a big split. I'm gonna put my 2 cents in as someone who did cruise ships for a long time, very recently. I am going to cover everything. So please repost this for people, whether you're interested in cruise ships or not, or you're just curious, because people need to know like the real about working on cruise ships. So save, repost, like, spread this. Anyone you know who's thinking about being on a cruise ship, if you're thinking about being on a cruise ship, so that they can come back to this video. I'm also someone who loved it enough that I'm going back on ships as a guest entertainer this time, but also as someone who did not do them until later in my career, not at the beginning of my career, because that's another factor. The first thing that I will say is that you need to make your decision based on you and your interest. People have very strong opinions, and it's not downplaying anyone's experience. It's a very specific lifestyle, and I will get into why that is in a second, but also is a very individual and a very personal experience. Which means that just because your friend experienced it doesn't mean you're gonna experience it that same way. If you are interested even remotely in the slightest, audition. And if you get offered a contract, take it. Some people very strongly have no interest in doing it on their own accord. They came to that conclusion themselves. And if that's you, then don't. But if you have some interest and the only reason you're thinking about not doing it is because someone said something about it, do it. Something that we as artists forget is that you have control. So literally, if you don't like it, you can quit. You don't want to be messy about it. Starting to feel and noticing it's not for you, be respectful. Give them enough notice to replace you if they're treating you with respect. If it's because you're being disrespected or your mental health's at jeopardy, of course, disregard this. But if you're like, you know, this is fine, but it's just not for me, you can leave. Just resign. Again, give them enough time. But if you don't like it, you can simply leave. And there's no harm, no foul there if you do it in a respectful, professional way. So as I said, I did not step foot on a cruise ship until I was 30 years old. And mind you, I had been in New York and I had graduated from college when I was 19. So I'd already been in the industry. I'd already done a bunch of stuff. And one of the reasons that I didn't do it is because everyone tried to talk me out of it for a really long time. And I just listened to my friends. So they're like, I hated it. And like, that's valid. Like the reasons they gave were very valid. But that was one of the reasons that I was like, kind of turned my nose up to cruise ships at the beginning of my career. Like a lot of people say this is a good job straight out of school, which I agree with. Like if you're wanting to go to the city, if you're wanting to save money, especially nowadays, cruises are going to be some of, if not the highest paying job you'll get outside of like a production Broadway contract. Includes like now with Equity National Tours, I got called in for something recently that was paying significantly less than I was making working on a cruise ship. City is very expensive and only getting more expensive, and that could be New York or LA. All of these places need money. So cruise is a great way to perform, work on your skills, and also save up a bunch of money so that you can move to those places once you've done a contract or two or however many you like. Another reason that I held off on doing it so long is that I am authentically a multi-hyphenate in the sense that I have even careers as an onstage performer, as well as a teacher, a choreographer, and so I work in all three equally. This wasn't just for cruise ships. This was for cruise ships, tours, any long-term contract. For me, I was really fighting against leaving my kids. Like that's a long time to miss. 6 months when you have a program or residency or you're an arts administrator is a long time. So for me, when I was younger, I wanted to not only put in my roots as a performer, but also as an educator. So for me, I was like, I want to focus on building relationships and my skills as an educator, and going on a cruise ship would not give you that freedom. Because if we're talking about cons, one of the biggest cons is the lack of communication. Now more fleets are getting updated where they have like Starlink, which is internet, but just think like slow internet is the best you'll get. For instance, the first contract I did, there was no Starlink, so we only had basic internet that was very expensive and unable to stream. And to clarify, I mean like streaming it live. You could download and save, and like you do get off the ship. So when you're in port, you can do those things. But in terms of like being at a sea day when you're on the ship and not on land, you wouldn't be able to stream it without pre-downloading things. So that meant for that 6-7 month period, no Netflix, no TikTok, like I couldn't do any of those things. If that's important to you, cruising may not be for you. And every ship is different, every fleet is different. But regardless, keep in mind that no matter what fleet you're on, the internet is always going to be a thing. If you are in a relationship, if you are close with your family and you need constant communication, that's going to be hard for you. Because even if you have the internet, it doesn't mean it's always going to work. So there are literally times where I would get messages days later and people would be upset with me thinking I was avoiding them. And I'm like, no, I literally have no access to the internet. And the first time I did it, because I was kind of thrown on the ship, I wasn't expecting to be gone. So I still had to finish my teaching school year, and that was hard to do from a ship. If you are someone who doesn't like being told what to do and you don't like rules, cruising may not be for you. Again, what I will reiterate is that it does depend on the fleet you're on. However, there are rules regardless. And it may not be crazy rules, but there are dress codes. You're generally not allowed to go out in your sweats. Some ships are very strict about not being on your phone when you're in guest area. So if you don't like being told what to do and you're going to get an attitude about it, this may not be the job for you. There's also, depending on the ship you're on, times when you're allowed to eat and when you're not allowed to eat. You can always have snacks and stuff in your cabin, but like in terms of going to restaurants or buffets or stuff like that, there are specific hours. So that's something to also think about. So if you're someone who's like, I need to have my snack right now, this may not be the job for you. Also, the living accommodations vary depending on the ship you're on. Because when I was working on a ship, it was in affiliation with Six, there were certain things that they negotiated. So for us, we got like the biggest cabins, we got pretty much full guest privileges, we got a lot of things, a lot of space. So living conditions for me were great, but for some people they're not. It also depends on what you're doing on the ship, right? So unfortunately, a lot of ships have a difference between like singers and dancers and then singer dancers. So a lot of times the singers get better accommodations than the dancers do, which isn't fair, but that's the way the ships operate. So keep that in mind. So if you're negotiating and you're finding out and deciding if you want to do it or not, ask them about where you'll be living, because that can make or break your experience. So if you're going to be on a ship where you're living in a very small space and you're someone who feels like you need a lot of space or you get claustrophobic, again, this may not be for you. Let's get into the pros, because for me, the pros far outweigh the cons. One of my favorite quotes that me and my friend Sasha always said is that, like, the cons con, but the pros pro. So let's get into it. Let's get into the pros, because for me, the pros far outweigh the cons. Again, make sure you're saving this and reposting so other people can find out about the pros and cons of ship life. I am literally going to cover everything. Let's talk again about the money. It was incredible to know that for 2 years straight, I didn't have to worry about money ever. Like, let's talk numbers, right? Some people are very like analytical and need to know numbers. Usually you're looking at about minimum $1,000 a week. This does literally depend on the line. Some pay less, most pay that or more, but you're looking at about $1,000 a week to perform, which, let's be real, most of the contracts that we're looking at nowadays aren't even paying that much. The travel, first and foremost. Imagine waking up in a new country every day. In the 2 years I was on a ship, I went to 19 countries. I want you to think about that. In normal life, you have to plan out when you're gonna take a vacation and you're paying for it. This is a job where they are paying you to travel. And the reality is that you'll perform your show, but most of the time, depending again, if you're a singer or dancer, it will depend and it will vary. But with us, we had show days. We would do our tech on the day of the show, we would perform. And then that meant that on other days, we could go out and explore. So pretty much every single port we were able to go to. And a lot of times you're repeating ports. But that meant that all the countries we got to go to, because our job was at night. So the performances happen when the guests are back on board. So during the day, you are free to explore. We did a 16-day transatlantic crossing. Some of those days were sea days, and usually that's when our performances would fall on. But I think there were like 10, 11 days that were not sea days. We woke up in a new country every single day, and we got paid to do it. If you're good with money, you also can save money, because you could theoretically never pay for food. There are like specialty restaurants and stuff like that on the ship, but if you want to save your money, they have free food available for you at all times. So you could save and just eat the free complimentary food and literally not pay for any of that, and you're also not paying for rent. Another pro is that you are getting to perform. That's your job. It's literally your job to perform. You get to sing, dance, brush up on your skills, and in a safe space, because audiences love what you give them. They're not gonna be super harsh and critical about you for the most part. So if you crack If you're trying to figure out new things, if you're trying to try out new vocal tips, it's a safe space to do that, so that when you're on land, you can kill it because you've done it a million times. It builds your stamina. Performing on a moving vessel is going to give you core strength. It's going to give you stamina. For example, I was in 6, right? So 6 is done all over the place. However, with us, we would have about, literally by the time you got out of costume, we were able to eat and had to get back in costume, an hour, maybe even less between shows. So we were doing 2 show days with an hour in between, doing 6 musical on a moving vessel. You can look at it as a pro or a con, but like the schedule can change. So sometimes your performances are spread out. There would be times where we would have 8 shows, but in a 5-day period. 2 show day, 2 show day, 1 day off, 2 show day, 2 show day. But it builds your stamina. It really does build your performance stamina. It teaches you to use a different skill. It teaches you to pace yourself. It teaches you so many different things. It teaches you that you can do way more than you think you can. There's nothing like performing on a rocky ship. But for me, it helped me as a performer be able to build stamina. I also want to reiterate that every single cruise line is different. So if you're talking to someone, say you're auditioning for like Norwegian, that's what I auditioned for, and you're talking to someone who worked on Carnival, 2 different experiences entirely. Every single line is different. So you need to talk to people who worked on that specific line you're talking about, just to get an idea and ask specific questions, because each line is different. It's not one size fits all. And I say this with love. Think of who you're talking to. So if someone is very high maintenance, they probably did hate living on a cruise ship. But if you know they're high maintenance in real life, think about how you are compared to how they are, and then measure what you're taking from what they're saying with that in mind. Also, the year that they worked there, things are different post-COVID. So if they worked there 10 years ago, they may not be the one you want to talk to. You want to talk to someone who's recently worked there. It also is similar to like when you're in a hotel. This again also depends on the ship and the terms of your contract, but you may have access to a housekeeping staff that can come and make up your bed and clean your room for you once a week. Tip them, don't abuse it. But then you make friends with them and they give you little treats, or they might use different laundry detergent on your stuff because they know you like it, or they'll leave you little treats, like stuff like that. And just speaking of the people you meet, you literally are going to meet people from all over the world, right? So like on our ship, the Americans, we were actually the minority on the ship. So pretty much everyone was from somewhere other than the States. And you get to meet people from hundreds of countries. You get to make lifelong friends. And hey, if you want to travel after you get off the ship, now you have friends everywhere so you can stay with them. It's like amazing. But most importantly, we're performers. You're getting paid a good amount to perform, to sing and dance, to dress up, to play pretend, as I always say. You're getting paid, and you're also getting paid to travel and see the world. New York is great. I've been in New York for 15 years. I also love London now, and Greece and Italy. I got to spend a whole summer in mainly Greece and Italy. Cappuccino every day, Prosecco every day, pasta every day. I got paid to do that. Where if I had just stayed in New York, I would have been just working and grinding. I always see so many people with the New York or nowhere mentality, and I want to remind you that New York's not going anywhere. You can still be that way. If you take 6 months off, you're still a New York resident. Like, you can just go back. People talk about momentum. In some ways, I guess there's validity to that, where like, if you keep going in front of the same teams over and over and over again, back to back to back, they'll remember you and bring you in for stuff. But I can say, as someone who was away for 2 years, they still will remember you. I get called in for more stuff now than I ever have. And I was away for 2 years. You will build those relationships back. 6 months is just that. It's 6 months, 8 months, however many months. Think about it like this. We're already in June. Everyone is like, when did June get here? It feels like it just became 2025. It feels like it was just last summer. Think of how quickly time flies, y'all. And they always say time flies when you're having fun. Imagine how much fun you'll have. And again, if you don't like it, you can just quit. So those are your pros and cons from my point of view. As I said, I am someone who loved it, but pretty much everyone around me did not love it. So I see both sides of it. I've heard both sides of it. You can evaluate it for you. Let's do a small summary. If you don't like rules, if you need to be in constant communication with home or your partner or with whatever, if you don't like small living spaces, but if you're worried about money, if you've wanted to travel, if you don't mind a little dress code, it's just, I took it as an excuse to just dress up more. This might be a good opportunity for you. So think about it. Again, if you have any interest, just try it. You can always quit. Let me know if you all have any more questions or anything about cruising. And I can't wait to get back on the ships in a few months. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.